Bene, siamo al Buddha Summer Camp, seconda edizione. Abbiamo il nostro terzo ospite, un ospite importante e molto gradito, Julian Daizan Skinner. È il primo inglese a recarsi in Giappone e a diventare Roshi o maestro Zen nella tradizione Rinzai. Nel corso di molti anni di rigoroso addestramento in Giappone e in Occidente, Daizan Roshi ha ricevuto la trasmissione del Dharma e il permesso di insegnare in entrambi i lineaggi, Rinzai e Soto dello Zen. Nel 2007 Daizan Roshi ha ricevuto l'inca da Shinzan Miyamae Roshi di Gyoku-ryuji. Al ritorno dal Giappone, Daizan Roshi è andato in pellegrinaggio, attraversando tutta la Gran Bretagna, dalla punta meridionale dell'isola di Wight alla punta settentrionale della Scozia, vivendo esclusivamente di elemosina. Durante questo periodo ha incontrato molti dei suoi studenti provenienti da diverse parti del Regno Unito. Attualmente Daizan Roshi offre sanzen, colloqui o incontri di formazione con i suoi studenti presso lo Yugagyo Dojo, Zen Yoga di Londra, e utilizza Skype per gli studenti a distanza. Inoltre, insieme ai suoi studenti, ha fondato lo Yugagyo Dojo, un luogo di formazione Zen a Londra. È altresì docente del corso intensivo di illuminazione creato da Charles Berner. Grazie.
So thank you so much for having me here at SanboJi. Thank you very much to Tetsugen Roshi. It's a very precious thing to have a practice place like this where the conditions are just about perfect for us to be able to touch something true and real in our lives. Just a few weeks ago, I took a group to Japan, which I do most years, and I visited Koshoji, one of the most important of the Soto Zen monasteries. They have one of the 3 tombs of Master Dogen there. And just a few months before, the training hall at Koshoji had closed. They don't have any monks there anymore. It's now more like a museum. And so it makes it very special to come the very next place I visit, such a alive place of practice. It's a precious thing. I appreciate very much what every single person is doing to make this place of practice as alive as it is. So thank you so much for having me. Also, as personally in my own practice, I spent about 14 years practicing in a Soto Zen monastery and about 5 years in a Rinzai Zen monastery. And so I've been asked to talk a little bit about the difference in those 2 styles of practice as well. So perhaps we can talk about that also. So first of all, if we look at our subject, perhaps we can begin with Buddhism in the West. What is Buddhism in the West and what has it become? Let's do this together. Perhaps you could turn to the person next door and say good morning if you haven't already. So perhaps with your partner, you could just think a little bit about what Buddhism is not in the West. Perhaps many of you will have experienced Buddhism in its Asian context. Perhaps you've been in Thailand, Japan, the Himalayas. We have still many parts of the world with living Buddhist cultures. And even if you haven't been there, very likely you've experienced through other means, TV, films, and so on. So let's get a little bit of a contrast. First of all, with your partner, what is Buddhism not in the West? Just discuss a little bit.
For us, it is not clear that if Buddhism in the West is a religion or not, because sometimes it is related to a religion, for example, to the Tibetan Buddhism with the Dalai Lama. But for other kind of Buddhists, such as Zen, there is a little bit of confusion. And sometimes people think that only normal people and not can practice Buddhism and not monks, and that they have to follow a particular path.
Okay. Right.
Passa il valore della compassione, passa del buddismo, ma spesso e volentieri passa solo quello, e quindi sembra che noi lavoriamo solo per questo, ma non si capisce in quale modo.
So we have the value of compassion, but sometimes it feels like we have just that, just the feeling of compassion. And therefore it feels that we work just with that. Compassion.
Thank you so much. So there's probably many things we could say here. I want to give you a few ideas that I've come across. So probably in most Buddhist countries, most people who call themselves Buddhists would think primarily what they're doing as making merit. They're going to the temple or supporting the monastery or the monks or the nuns as a way to make merit. Doesn't mean much to many of us, but that's an important thing. You come across Buddhism, and particularly as a religion, as a way of marking phases of life. For example, in Japan, 95% or more of people's contact with Buddhism is funerals. Okay? Everybody, even a Christian, has a Buddhist funeral. Even a Shinto priest has a Buddhist funeral. So that sort of marking particular phases of life is an important aspect in Asia. People might go to the temple very commonly as a way of finding guidance, what we might call fortune telling or prognostication. As you perhaps know, even the Dalai Lama has his personal diviner, somebody who is an oracle. And then we have Buddhism as a means of creating a country or creating a state. For example, in Japan, the emperor built Todaiji, which at the time was the temple with the biggest Buddha in the world. And the implication was that this was built by the biggest emperor in the world. You know, the temple was a kind of a symbol of the state. And still, for example, on Japanese money to the present day, there's some symbolism from very important temples, which is there. So so Buddhism has been used as a means of creating the concept of a particular state and a particular political system. All right, so there are many differences. Let's now look at the opposite. So we've had contact between Buddhism and the West for quite a long time, potentially a little over 2,000 years. It seems very likely there was a Buddhist influence on the culture in Alexandria, in Egypt, and possibly further as well. And much more directly from the time of the European empires onwards. So we have approaching 200 years of contact between Buddhism and the West. So what has Buddhism become for us in the West? Perhaps you could turn to a different partner and let's just look at this now. What has Buddhism come to mean for us in this 200 years of contact we've had? So with a different partner.
Noi abbiamo notato che in un Occidente che va sempre di più verso l'individuo e quindi sempre più concentrato sul singolo, quindi anche sull'egoismo, si sente un po' l'esigenza di valori diversi e questi valori secondo me il buddismo li rappresenta molto, secondo noi. Quindi è proprio una reazione a questo individualismo spinto che secondo me l'Occidente rappresenta sempre di più.
Su questo potremmo dire che il buddismo porta a una rivoluzione culturale, in quanto c'è uno spostamento del punto di attenzione, come già avevo espresso, sull'io, l'individuo, verso un concetto di sé che cambia.
Thank you. So we have, I think in all of this, perhaps, we have a common thread. For us in the West, Buddhism is perhaps the most developed way of following a path of the inner journey, the inner cultivation. Particularly the Mahayana form of Buddhism, over history, we've seen incredible developments. There's been a principle at work that the teachings adapt for particular cultures, particular societies. So what resonates for the nobleman of 500 BC will be different to what is meaningful for a Korean fisherman of 500 AD or a Japanese samurai of 1000 AD or a Tibetan peasant of 1500 AD. There's a principle of adaptation. And so we've had 2,500 years of divergence, of diversity. Now we have a new situation. We come in European culture with a very, very common foundation. And so personally, when I meet, for example, a monk, a Western monk from the Tibetan tradition or from the Thai forest tradition, the sorts of things that we find important and that we share are very similar. much more so than a Thai monk meeting a Tibetan monk, for example. They're at the outer point of that divergence. We're coming together again. We have this coming together within Europe, within the Western world generally, of this focus on individual cultivation and what grows out of that. My own teacher in Japan, Zen master Shinzen, he would do a talk every morning, and almost every morning he started his talk with Hajimete Kensho, Futatsu Kensho, Mitsu Kensho. First thing, Kensho. Second thing, Kensho. Third priority, also Kensho. Kensho, as you know, being that seeing, knowing who you really are, finding out who you really are. And it seems to me that this means, in some ways, we're coming back to the beginning of Buddhism again. We're coming back to a human being examining deeply the truth of themselves and the truth of the world. When we do this, when we do it right, we find that there's nothing solid, there's nothing fixed, there's nothing that we can say, this is me and was always me and will always be me. It's more like I'm a process, I'm a dance, I'm a piece of music. Maybe I'm like a violin part in a great symphony, but there's nothing fixed. And we find this for ourselves. When we don't do this, we live in a reality of little me, great big universe. And in that mindset, little me, however intelligent I am, however well-connected I am, however rich I am, however well-educated I am, it's an unequal fight. I can't win. My life is inevitably a tragedy. There is no happy ending in that mindset, in that reality. When we see through this sense of me as a defended, fixed, solid thing, when we see that that is simply not how we are, then it's no longer me against the world. It's me and the world arising together, moment by moment. No conflict, no fight, no struggle, no stress. I think this is very important when we consider 2 days ago was the 78th anniversary of the atom bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Right now, just a few hundred miles away, we have major war in Europe. We have the drones, the missiles, the bullets, the shells flying. When we can overcome this inner conflict, we become able, I think, to genuinely affect the world in a way that can resolve conflict. I feel that this inner journey is something that maybe 4% of the population want to do. Other people, other things are important for them. You know, they have other priorities in life. I believe in almost every culture, in almost every period, we see roughly that percentage of people doing this kind of work. But that's fine. I don't think we need everybody to do this to have a profound effect on society. Somewhere in the Bible, I think it's in the Bible, there's the image of the yeast in the bread, the tiny little bit of yeast that allows the bread to grow. I think our job is to be like that yeast in the society. And that little bit of yeast can have a powerful effect. The sociology researchers tell us that everybody, the people who are perhaps shy and not very social, and the very social people, everybody has 1,000 people in their circle. Your life touches 1,000 people. Some of them very intimately, long-term. Some of them perhaps just you say good morning in the cafe, something very slight. But there's 1,000 people that your life touches. So what that means is in 2 steps, because those people also touch 1,000 people, your life, how you are, how you move through the world touches 1 million people, just in 2 steps. So you're a very important person. How you are is very powerful within a society, within the world. One of the strange things about our culture, for hundreds of years, those people who wanted to seriously follow this inner journey, they would be essentially put in prison for life, isolated from the society for life. That was the normal thing for generation after generation after generation. So it's like there's a vitamin in our diet that we've been missing for hundreds of years.
Una delle cose strane della nostra cultura è che noi per centinaia di anni abbiamo, o comunque le persone che per centinaia di anni hanno voluto seguire questo viaggio interiore, sarebbero finite in prigione per sempre, sarebbero rimaste isolate dalla società per sempre, generazione dopo generazione. È come se ci fosse una vitamina che manca nella nostra vita.
So now we have this moment in history. We have this incredible opportunity. We have people like Tetsugen Roshi, who's been willing to travel across the world to deal with all the cultural differences and so on in order to bring something back here and plant it very deeply into Italian soil to provide this environment in which this new impulse can begin to grow, can begin to develop, in which rather than things being imprisoned and closed down, they can be open. So this brings us to our second question, really, in our initial proposal: how to bring the Buddha Dharma into a context that is no longer monastic. Now, well, let's look at that, but we've been sat down for a very long time. You've been very patient. Thank you so much. Why don't we have 3 minutes to get some air, stretch a little bit, if you need to use the washroom, that sort of thing. And then let's have a look at what how things might be in a context that's beyond monastic. How would that be? Question was how to bring the Buddha Dharma into a context that is no longer monastic. It's a very big question. I thought the only way I could usefully answer it was to share my own story and the story of the practice community that I work within. So we're called Zenways, or Japanese Zendo Kai. Zen, do means way, and Kai is like a group or sangha or association. Zendo Kai, Zenways. So in 1989, that's me, a little bit younger, I was given permission by a teacher of Soto Zen to enter the monastery. I was 25 or 26, I think maybe 26 by the time. I was born and grew up in the part of the UK closest to France, closest to mainland Europe. I was born the day that John Kennedy was killed. And so my upbringing was very much in the Cold War period. My father was very keen on sports. And at that time, when I was perhaps 5 or 6 years old, late 60s, in the UK, the game of squash was very popular. And the only place you could play squash in our local area was in the local army camp, the Army Intelligence Corps, like the spies of the army. And so my father would come back home after these games of squash, telling us, I was maybe 5, 6 years old, anytime they want, the Russians can be across Europe in 24 hours and across the UK in another weekend or something. And the only way we can stop them is to press the button. And that was the story. So I grew up with a strong sense that life was likely to be short. And so there was an urgency in life. I did the normal things, school, university. I worked in the pharmaceuticals industry for just long enough to go up a little bit and feel what corporate life was like. I bought a house, did all the normal things. By 26, I felt like, okay, done. So I sold the house, gave all the money away, and the best thing I felt I could do with time was this inner journey that we've been talking about before our little break. So age 26, I enter the monastery. It's on the border between Scotland and England, in the hills, not quite as dramatic as this, but a little bit like this, very alone, isolated. They had their 50th anniversary last summer, so it's been there for a while. And for the first 7 years, I lived in the meditation hall. I had one tatami like this, with 2 cupboards, the bottom one for bedding and the top one for clothes, with somebody here, about 20 of us in there. And so you have nowhere to hide. It's just, that's your life. The one space where you sit, where you sleep, where you live, where you eat sometimes. And I found there were about 30 people living in the monastery. And probably about 4 months into my time there, I had a grudge against every single person I realized There was something I hated about them. And so once I realized that everybody was a problem, I started to get an idea maybe where the problem was. The practice was with my teacher, Zen master Daishin, English, and the focus was on, as they say in Zen, ekko hensho, turning the light around, facing yourself, seeing yourself, no distractions. You've just got the one mat, your little things, very simple life, facing yourself. So, because there's nothing else to do, you do it. And at a certain point, like we said before, you directly realize that I'm not a thing. I'm ungraspable. There's just this dance of life. And when we find that out, then you go and share with your teacher. And he said, a little daikon is still a daikon. Do you know a daikon? It's like a radish. You know, some of them, they're really quite big, you know. But even a little daikon is still a daikon. Even a little understanding is still an understanding. And this seeing who we are, seeing what we are, they call in Japanese kensho. Ken means to know or to see or to realize, and show who you really are. So it's one word they use for that direct seeing, that I'm not a thing. There's nothing there to hold on to. So I spent about 14 years with this teacher in the monastery, and over the years he gave me permission to teach, and you know, I went through the stages and so on to be recognized. The teacher, he had a problem, and still does. It's possible in practice, when you go deep, for your practice to make you sick, if it's not done with certain things in mind. And I'm sorry to say, but this teacher, he now has to live by himself in a hermitage in the mountains. He can be in public about 2 weeks a year. He has no energy. And we can talk more about why that happens if you're interested. But I want you to know that you're very fortunate to have a teacher with strong energy and a lot of grounded and centeredness, so that that's not going to happen here. So after about 14 years, I wasn't seeing him very much anymore. He was sick, he was away. So I was interested to do some more study. So I went to, if we do our next picture maybe. I went to Japan and I met the teacher on the right there. He's called Shinzan Miyamai. And I've written a couple of books that mention him a lot. He is very much a teacher of the Rinzai approach to Zen. And so I had a chance to experience that style with him. And so we had this question about the difference. What's the difference? Well, I think one way that we can think of the difference between the two is, from what I experienced of Soto practice, we try to create a kind of a constant state of awareness, of presence. When we're sitting zazen, we just sit zazen. When we're eating lunch, we just eat lunch. When we're bowing, we just bow. But there's a kind of a continuity through it all. In the Rinzai approach, it's more like they squeeze you really hard, and then there's a release. A squeeze and a release, like that kind of thing. So in some ways, the practice looks more strict because there are parts that it's very tight, but then there's a space for this letting go, this releasing, maybe even drinking beer, maybe even, you know, almost like partying. And they've found over the years that this tight release tends to cause those moments of shift more quickly than the constant awareness. And so many people who go to just do a little bit of practice, maybe in Japan, they only see the outside face of Rinzai practice and they think, oh, it's so hard, it's so strict. And it is, there is a very strict side, but there's this other face, this other side. I'm sorry? Ah, thank you. Sorry, I'm talking too much, please. So the perhaps if we do the next one. Oh, maybe the next one. Oh, I missed one out. Sorry. So I studied with Master Shinzan in a temple called Gyokuryuji in the mountains in central Japan. It was the hermitage of Zen Master Bankei a couple of 100 years ago, who I believe you were studying recently with Master Tetsugen. So the emphasis of the practice was on koan study, practicing with a question. My teacher, Zen Master Shinzan, he always started people with the question, who am I? And he recommended this as he thought the most important question. And then, but there are many others. So I spent 5 years or so with him, studying these koans and living the temple life. We maybe we can, you know, the normal things, zazen, samu. So also over the years of my practice, right from the beginning, I've had a very stiff body, a lot of tension in my body, very closed and so on. I used to, before Zen, I used to play rugby and run marathons, things like that. So to start with, for me, zazen was torture. So over the years of my practice in the temples I've been in, anything I could learn about the body and working with making the body more aligned, more comfortable and more energized, I really made that a focus point. And so, oh, right. So that's at Gyokuryuji. So, so in May 2007, Zen Master Shinzen named me as his successor, and at that point, I came back to the UK. I'd been away from the world at that point for about 20 years. So I didn't have any money. I didn't have any connections. When I got back to the UK, it was very obvious my family didn't want me in the house. So I was homeless. So there were many things that I couldn't really do when I got back, but one thing I could was walk. So as Sensei mentioned, I started at the south of the island of Britain and walked up the middle to the north of Scotland, just living on food that people put in my bowl. And so I started on a little island that's just south of the mainland of Britain on midsummer morning, 21st of June, 2007. And so I started at dawn, maybe 5 a.m., something like that. And about 9:30 a.m., a car pulled up beside me and the window went down. And this lady said, "Are you Daizan Roshi?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "I heard about you on the radio. Will you teach me to meditate?" And I said, "Okay." So she pulled the car up and she sat on my rucksack on the side of the road and we did some Zazen together. And that was our beginning. So over that walk through the country, the first of our students who began the Zenway Sangha started to come. From what I'd been learning over the previous 20 years, oh yeah, that's in Scotland, I developed a kind of a form of practice that comes from primarily from a Zen master called Hakuin a couple of 100 years ago, and he calls it the 2 wings of a bird. The first wing of the practice are things which will open up our awareness, help us to see how we are, how reality is, more and more clearly. Things like working with the koan, shikantaza, facing the truth of the moment. Okay, so that was what he calls a rikan, 1 wing of the bird. But then the second wing of the bird, Hakuin calls naikan, and these are a series of practices that he learned and shared that are based around building a kind of grounded, energized physical system. This came out of his own practice life in which he got very sick. Practice made him sick. And so it's in the book Practical Zen that I wrote a few years ago. We have this system of practice bringing together these 2 wings, these 2 key elements. The expansion or the development or the cultivation of awareness, coupled with this grounding and energization of the human system. So what else can we show you? So we have a dojo in London. we've been, let's see now, 2012. So it's our 12th birthday of our dojo this year. I realized time's getting on, so we could perhaps just go through. So we had my teacher over. This is him giving a lecture at Oxford University about the Zen philosopher Nishida. Somebody you might be interested in. Nishida had a very intense Zen practice, had an understanding, things opened up for him, and then he spent his life translating that into Western philosophical language. He wanted to build a bridge between the West and the East. And so my teacher was interested to share Nishida's ideas at the university in Oxford. So if we just go on, just very quick, that's not important. That's not really important. That's not important. Doesn't matter. Maybe this one. So in helping people to get this first awakening, this first shift to realize and absolutely know for themselves who they really are, the truth of things, we use a kind of a practice retreat where you work with a partner. We do this because when people investigate by themselves, which works very well, but particularly new people, they get distracted. It's, who am I? That coffee at breakfast, was it made well enough? I would have liked to have some cream in the coffee. Do they have cream in Italy? No, who am I? You know, we spend 95% of the time somewhere else. But when you have a person sat in front of you and you're focused on a question, and then maybe whatever arises, you speak it out to that person, you can go from 5% attention to pretty much 100% attention immediately. And so for a new person with a wandering mind, we found it helps a lot to work with a partner. So we have a kind of a retreat for helping people to get that sort of shift to start with. We do about 6 or 8 of those every year. And then can we go on? So one of the things, oh, please, thank you. You all look like you understand everything. So one of the questions that was there for me as I was walking through the country, through the UK, was exactly this question that we're examining. The one thing that was really clear to me was it would be meaningless to try to create a little piece of Zen Japan in the UK. Even in Japan, people used to say to me, I can't connect how such a hard life has got anything to do with finding happiness. I don't see. How does that work? So if we don't do that, what are we going to do? How are we going to create a structure that works for people? So one of the things that we've done is we have a professional, externally validated teacher training program for people to be yoga teachers. And we have about 300 Zenways yoga teachers in different parts of the world. And we have a similar program, externally validated, a professional training for people to be mindfulness and meditation, Zen-based teachers. The idea being that somebody could make a living doing this work, which would be in line with their own practice, and hopefully give them not only a living, but some time to be able to go deep on their own inner journey, so that they could create a structure that would be sustainable within our society. So perhaps to give an example of how things seem to be evolving, on the left-hand side there is Mark Kuren Westmaket. He's about 42 years old. He's been studying with me almost as soon as I got back from Japan, so about 16 years. When he first came, he was an astrophysicist, working first of all at London University, and then later he worked at the European Space Observatory with the Hubble telescope. So Mark, I'm not releasing any secrets here. He's written about this in a number of books. As a young boy, he was sexually abused by his father. His mother realized, and of course the father was thrown out of the family. The mother had a very active connection with Christianity. In fact, she worked as a Bible smuggler, taking Bibles into Eastern Europe, particularly Poland. Later, she married a Christian priest. The husband and wife had a terrible car accident where the priest was killed. Mark's mother lost both her legs and that much of this arm. So Mark got involved in astronomy because it was the furthest thing away from humanity that he could find. He wanted to keep humanity at a distance. It was too painful. People and their stuff was just, he didn't feel anything that he either wanted to or could deal with. Mark came to me to practice initially because he was interested in shooting. He was in the UK shooting team, not shooting people, like Olympic shooting. He was interested in the breathing, the body, the alignment, clearing the mind, that kind of thing. Slowly, slowly, things began to open up for him. Some of this pain, some of these difficulties began to resolve, to release. He became more engaged in the practice. And on retreat in Japan with my teacher, we had a group over there, a session, and my teacher came to me at a certain point, and he said in English, "Red hair, open eye." So that was a beginning for Mark, and over time, over years, he decided to move out of astronomy. He did our yoga teacher training and began to teach yoga, to live in London, and also to teach meditation and mindfulness. He was able to reconnect with the human race enough that he's now married. He's got a 1-year-old boy, a beautiful, beautiful boy who is so loved. Mark has written a number of books now, connecting up the cosmos, the universe, what we know about space, his astronomy work, and the inner universe. If I have a plane crash on the way back to the UK tomorrow, yeah, Mark's still got some practice to do, and I've arranged with another teacher for him to finish things off, but he will probably be a successor and will carry things on. He's leading a lay life. He has a mortgage, he has a car, he has a wife, he has a kid. Doesn't get more lay than that, really, does it? So that's just one example of one person finding their way as a non-monastic practitioner of Zen in the Western world. I'm guessing many people, many of you are finding your way, and I think we're very fortunate. We have a very creative time right now in which many doors are open, many possibilities are open for exploring, bringing this inner work out from behind those walls where it was for hundreds and hundreds of years, particularly in Europe, to the street, to the world. Now, I'm very aware that lots of time's going by. How are we doing? What do we really need to stop, or do we need some questions, or what should we do?
We have lunch at 1.
At 1 p.m. So should we do some questions? Is that a good move? Okay, so maybe we do.
Would you like to end up?
Well, I don't want to bore anybody, you know. It's like, well, maybe we could just do this bit a little bit, just a tiny bit more. It's very short, and then maybe we could do some questions after that. Maybe if people wanted to after lunch. So after I received the email from Sengyo, I happened to be in Japan, and I thought that's a really interesting question. What does lay Zen practice look like these days in Japan? So when I was in Kyoto, I went to visit this group, the Ningen Zen Kyodan, they're called. They're a lay Zen group. They've been meeting for, this year is their 75th anniversary. So they have quite an established structure. They have about 12 Zen masters teaching in various parts of Japan, and about, I think, 10 or 11 dojos. So I wanted to meet them and sort of get a feel for what they're doing. So the teacher, I've forgotten his name, but I can tell you later if you're interested. He has combined about 30 years of Zen practice with being quite a busy lawyer in Kyoto. He's now retired, but still very active. I got 20 blows from him. So he likes the keisaku. And the way their system works, they have as a foundational practice, counting the breath, working with the breath, focusing on the hara, the belly, the abdomen, and developing an abdominal breath. They do that. And he said to me, the goal is to count from 1 to 100 breaths 3 times back to back without even one thought arising. That's what that's their where they start. And then they also have a system of koan practice, koan study. When you pass your first koan, they give you a new name. You have like a dharma name at that point. And when you pass all the koans, and they have their own system, it's about 120. When you pass all of them, then you become a roshi, a Zen master in their system. And they estimate it's about 20, 25 years. And then I had a chance to visit another group. So on the right here is a German Soto Zen monk called Muho. He studied at a temple called Antaiji, where it's probably in Japan the #1 Zazen dojo. They really emphasize a lot of sitting. So in their sessions, they don't do any chanting, they don't do any teisho, any samu, just 14 hours of sitting every day. So Muho practiced there for a few years, and his teacher gave him Dharma transmission. And then Muho left the temple and he lived as a homeless person in the park around Osaka Castle. At that time, in the early 80s in Japan, I can remember seeing it. A lot of homeless people lived in tents in the park there. Maybe you were there, Roshi, that time. Maybe you saw. So Muho was living in this homeless camp, practicing Zazen and teaching Zazen amongst these homeless people in the park around the castle. And a few months later, he got the news that his teacher had died. The temple was on the side of a mountain, and the teacher had been driving a tractor and rolled it and died instantly. So they wanted Muho to go back and run Antaiji. And so for 20 years, Muho was the Roshi of Antaiji. He had a mixed group with Japanese students coming to practice, many for long term, and Westerners also, with this strong focus on Zazen and on also physical work. They didn't manage it, but they approached self-sufficiency, growing their own food. So now, 20 years later, Muho has passed on the Dharma to a Japanese woman, a Japanese nun, who is now the Roshi at Antaiji. And he is now again leading a group in Osaka Castle Park. So I went to sit with him there, and they meet on a Sunday morning at about 6 a.m. or a little before, and you sit on the wall of the castle. It's about that wide. Below you, the wall falls away with a kind of curve like that, and there's the moat, the lake around the castle. So you're sat with nothing in front of you. Goodbye, sleepy Zazen. So they meet together about 6 a.m. Sunday mornings. They do some yoga outside, summer or winter. Some people have yoga mats. Some people just put their coats down on the ground. Some people don't have anything. They do about an hour Zazen along the castle wall. And then they go and sit in a cafe, and like Starbucks cafe kind of place, and discuss the teachings of Master Dogen. And they do that every Sunday. And that's their system, that's their practice. And as you can see, Muho doesn't do much of formal stuff. You know, it's all pretty relaxed, really. But very sincere, nevertheless, very clearly a very kind of sincere group. So that's two examples that I've come across recently of people in Japan exploring what practice outside the monastery walls might look like. So I don't know, maybe there's some ideas there, or some possibilities. So we have a little more time together. If there's anything that we didn't get a chance to discuss this morning or talk about this morning, perhaps we've got an opportunity now. If there's anything that might be useful, I'm here at your service. Well, my experience is quite narrow. I don't get many invitations like this. I don't get many invitations to visit with other Zen practice communities, which is a shame because it's beautiful. It's really a lovely thing. So there are, from my limited experience, I would say many of the actual practices in America, in Europe, in Japan, many of the practices are the same. People have worked very hard to bring things from, for example, forms, the ways to offer incense, the ways to bow, the ways to sit. People have been very, over the last 100 years perhaps, people have worked very hard to bring these to the Western world. But the associations are different. For example, you noticed we had our picture of Muho in a t-shirt, a sun hat, tracksuit trousers. If he leads his Zazen group in Osaka wearing his robe, people start to immediately think about funerals. Where has somebody died? What's going on? There's such a strong connection that he doesn't tend to do that very much because the association, which is so strong in that culture, he finds not helpful. So in some ways, he looks more like a yoga teacher than what we would think of as a Zen teacher, perhaps. He's found that's for where he wants to communicate things, that's more appropriate. Well, I don't know, in your community, perhaps you see the same thing. We have quite a few Japanese people come to practice with us at our dojo in London, some for more than 10 years now. And what are Western people more careful about? One of the things that happened for me just after I did that walk through the UK that I mentioned, I was in London and I'd just done a few months of walking meditation, so I was quite open. And I was sitting on the London subway, the tube train, early in the morning, about 9:30, something like that. And there was a young woman sitting opposite me, and she was crying. And I was open up enough to be able to tell that it was a sort of loneliness. She was suffering from a kind of loneliness. And I decided then really that anything that we did in Europe, in the Western world, I wanted it to have a warm heart. And so over the years, we've spent so long sitting around drinking tea, and maybe it looks like nothing is happening, but that time being together, drinking tea, seems to be like a slow growing tree, and the roots connecting, joining, touching, and that sense of people really meeting each other and taking enough time to really meet each other is something, at least in my little experience of Zen in Japan, I didn't see so much of that. And the Japanese people who come to our dojo seem to value that and recognize and appreciate that human connection time. So I don't know if that might answer that question. I think you said it perfectly. I don't think does anything else need to be said. I think that's it. No. Thank you.
Io avrei due domande, in realtà, fatto da prima. In questi giorni abbiamo avuto, attraverso gli insegnamenti, anche esempi di come l'adattamento dello Zen all'Occidente sia stato fatto a volte magari anche in modi non virtuosi, o magari ha generato alcune storture magari del tiene o della concezione della pratica stessa. Volevo chiederle se secondo lei se sono stati anche dei casi di adattamento virtuoso in cui l'Occidente ha restituito qualcosa allo Zen arricchendo a sua volta.
Good question. So, what do you think, Roshi? Cases? What do you think? Maybe the West has bought good coffee, good weather, beautiful places, beautiful people. I think more than anything, and it's very obvious, this is absolutely true for here, what the West and the people from the West have brought to this is something very, very special. Back in 2012, when we opened our dojo in London, my teacher came from Japan to open it. And he said, he did a little talk, he said, I'm expecting the Zen masters of the future to come from this dojo. Why? Because nobody's here for money. There's no money here. Nobody's here for any kind of status or getting famous. People are here with a pure motivation, a sincere heart. And that's the most important thing of all. We could go through society like little missionaries, trying to catch people, trying to convert people. We could do that, but we don't. We have a principle in Zen that it's not so easy to translate into English. Maybe it's easier into Italian. They say kanno doko. Kanno doko means it's a little bit like electricity. If you have a battery and a wire, so you have a current here, you can have another wire here, and when this one is flowing, this one starts, even though they don't touch. So one of the reasons why this is a special place, a precious place, is because you have the opportunity to come and sit with the master. Maybe he doesn't say a word. Maybe he doesn't look at you. Maybe you don't get to go to Sanzen. But when you sit with a true teacher, that battery that's running in him will start something up in you. When a true Zen person is going through society, exactly the same thing will be happening. And it works in both ways. We all know how when somebody is angry, they might not say a word, but immediately you can feel it in you, you know, and the fight can happen, you know, so fast. It's the same principle. Human beings are group animals. We're very like those birds, you know, that can fly just so together, you know, we're the same. We do that all the time. So we become like when we connect with a teacher over time, we become like the teacher. and then we bring that out into the world. So it's not about what you say. It's not necessarily about even what you do. It's about how you are, where you're coming from. And if you can do that, then you can mend a pair of shoes and save all sentient beings. You can design a new car. You can teach a bunch of kids. Whatever you're doing, it's something true. It's something that makes a difference in the world. Number one thing, listen to your teacher. His job is to save you time. Time is very short. Your life is like in the morning when you offer the stick of incense. Your life is getting shorter, 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 shorter. All we know is that every day that goes by is a day less that we have. Your teacher can save you precious time, precious, precious. It's the only thing we can't make more of. We can make more money. We can make a bigger temple, but we can't make any more time. So your teacher is so, so precious and so important. So please listen to your teacher. Maybe we can do a picture. Is that okay? Yeah. I can move with this. That's all right? Yeah. So if we can imagine, this is kind of like a complete person, like a person with three main zones, if you like, or areas within the body. The head, the heart, and the lower body, particularly the belly, what they call in Japanese the hara and koshi, this area. So we've probably all met people who are like that. Nothing here, everything here. Before we look at that kind of person, let's just share that first part. All right, so this kind of person, the head person, what are they like? Intellectual. Heady. Confused sometimes, yeah.
Always thinking.
Too much thinking. Too many, yeah. A lot of mind stuff, yeah. Competitive sometimes, yeah. Anxious, can be a very anxious kind of person, like everything's like, is it okay? You know, that sort of headiness, yeah. Maybe more speaking, yeah. So we all meet those kind of people. And of course, we have a problem. We've spent 4 years locked down being heady people on Zoom. We all have. So this is, as you know, there's plenty of this about. Okay, so then we could think about this kind of person, where there's nothing much here, it's all this. So an example, one of my students is a yoga teacher at one of the drama schools in London, where they train actors and actresses, and everything's, I love her, I hate her. You know, it's like the emotion of the moment is everything. That's the reality. You know, we could call that maybe a heart person. And maybe you meet people like that sometimes. And then we have maybe somebody like that, like a guts person or a belly person. What are they like? Maybe materialist, yeah. Maybe very solid, indecisive, or decisive? Indecisive. Stubborn. Impulsive. Yeah, can be like criminal kind of. Maybe like a sumo wrestler, you know, everything's, you know. So none of these, of course, are perfect. Our ideal is we have all of these dimensions, you know. Well, that's what a human being can potentially have. Now, in the 15th century, there was a lot of connection for a short time between the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church here in Italy, and the Orthodox system of meditation, which is called hesychasm, became something that was quite discussed and became quite featured. Now, this hesychasm practice, it's still used in the Eastern Orthodox Church. They use a lot of things very close to mantras, prayers, short prayers, like mantras. And some of them, you put the prayer in the heart, very common. There's other ones where you put the prayer in the belly. There was a big kind of, if you like, counter attack against this kind of practice back in the 15th century. And from that time to this, something, at least in English, something that's completely stupid, a waste of time, futile, pointless, is called navel gazing. Maybe we go from that.
I'm sorry, I just lost the last part. The first part.
Okay, you give what you got. All right.
Quindi diciamo, tutte queste figure non sono perfette e sarebbe ideale sicuramente avere tutte queste parti di cui vi ho parlato prima. Pensate che nel XV secolo c'erano delle connessioni tra la Chiesa ortodossa e la Chiesa cattolica. Qui in Italia, per esempio, il sistema ortodosso di meditazione viene chiamato appunto TV ed era sicuramente un sistema molto discusso. E questa pratica viene ancora utilizzata nella Chiesa ortodossa.
Okay. So where did we get up to? Can you just tell me the last bit? Where did we get up to?
We talked about mantras.
Okay, okay. So these kind of prayers, some of the practices involved praying from the heart, moving your attention to the heart and pronouncing or speaking this prayer from the heart. Some involved putting the attention, the focus in the belly. But this was ridiculed. This was made a joke of in the Western Church. And now, at least in English, they call the navel gazing. It is used in English to mean something that's really stupid, something that's a waste of time. Maybe in Italian or no? You don't have that? Well, basically, in the 15th century, this happened. The belly disappeared. Okay. Before then, you can see in paintings, in statues, beautiful belly. It's very present. And then it disappears. And we still live in a culture now where we want the belly to disappear. No belly is best belly, you know? And we lose our grounding, our power, our energy when this is not there. When we practice seriously, there can be a tendency for things to move upwards anyway. Makes this even more of a problem. And the example of my teacher, where his energy is just gone, he's just really gone, is really an example of this kind of situation. So my second teacher used to sometimes use the image of a tree. If you have a tree with very small roots, then the more the tree grows, the more dangerous it is, the more likely it is to fall over. So if we, in our practice, if we take care to look after the roots, to grow the roots, to be strong in the roots, then the tree can grow high safely. Then there's no problem. Then we can move towards being that sort of harmonious kind of development. And our practice will, if it's done right, will give us more energy, more grounding. So when you get up from your zazen, you're less tired than when you sat down. That's how it should be. So, in my experience, you spend about an hour a day, typically, in this position. Maybe 2 hours, weeding. Those Zen gardens, the gravel gardens, they're babysitters for young monks. It's just, if you don't do it every day, the weeds come up, you know? So you're in this position, and then maybe you need to stretch a little bit, and then you're doing a little bit more. And so in a lot of Zen places, they would say, you don't need yoga. You don't need yoga. You're doing it, you know? So in my experience, about 2/3 of Zen places I've been in, that's been the case. So that leaves about 1/3 of places, in my experience, that do have some kind of movement work in their schedule. Now, the thing is, they mostly call it, well, a variety of names. So, for example, quite often in temples, they'll call it taiso or Zen taiso, which means maybe something like Zen exercise. You know, they won't call it yoga. My teacher liked to call his movement practice Do Zen. So Zazen means sitting Zen, Do Zen means moving Zen. So he would do a very kind of relaxed kind of thing every afternoon about 5 o'clock in his office. We could come and join in or not, he didn't mind. And he'd be talking on the phone or giving somebody advice in the room. What you need to do is plant that rice earlier or whatever, you know, as he was doing it, very relaxed. And he called it Do Zen. Now, the first person in my that I've been able to find that put together the words Zen and yoga was a teacher called Masahiro Oki. So he was a spy in the war. He was spying for Japan in the war. And he actually learnt some yoga as part of his first mission. His first mission he had to disguise himself as a Tibetan monk and wander about in the Himalayas looking for, I don't know, military targets or something. And so he took it very seriously, and that's what he did. And then his second mission, he got sent to Iran, what was Persia at the time, and he was captured. And he was condemned to death, chained to a rock. Another person who was condemned to death at the same time was a Sufi, a Muslim mystic. And apparently they were both waiting for the execution. And this man was completely peaceful. He was even having a nice time, relaxed, and Oggi was terrified, just absolutely terrified. This man absolutely changed Oggi's sense of what was even possible for a human being. So then, right at the last minute, there was a revolution in Persia, and the jail was opened, and they were saved. So maybe we could do that bit. So Oggi, oh, excuse me. So after the war, Oggi, like many ex-combat people, had a very difficult time settling back into normal life. He worked as a smuggler for a while, and then he entered a Soto Zen monastery, not for very long, but for a while. And then he went back to India. He got to know Mahatma Gandhi, and he studied yoga, and he worked for UNESCO, for United Nations Children staff. And he got bowel cancer. He made a vow, if I can cure myself of this bowel cancer with yoga, then that's what I'm going to dedicate my life to sharing. And that's exactly what happened. So he created a dojo at the foot of Mount Fuji, and he brought together what he'd learned of yoga, what he'd learned of Zen, and was a very, very active teacher. He started off working with people who were very sick, and he developed a very intensive practice of very like a Zen daily schedule these people were going through, but with some movement work in there. And he got more and more popular. A lot of Zen people went to him. He started teaching the Japanese royal family, got very well known. And then actually in, I think it was 84, he was invited to teach here in Italy, somewhere on the coast. Pesaro, okay. And I have this from his assistant. I interviewed her. We'll stop there? Yeah, please. And according to his assistant, he really didn't want to go. He didn't want to go to Italy. Can you imagine that? So the night before he was to fly over, he got really drunk. Apparently he would never do this. He got really drunk. He missed the plane. His students were really angry with him. They booked up a ticket for the next day. They pushed him on the plane. So he went over to Italy, and he delivered a series of lectures, 5 lectures, I think. And after the last one, he went down to the beach. He went swimming, never seen again. Never seen again. And so his students in Japan have been speculating ever since. Was he using his spy techniques to start a new life? Maybe he's here in Italy. Or did a current catch him? Nobody knows. Nobody knows. But he's been very influential on yoga in Japan, and a number of Zen people through the years went to study with him, some quite extensively. There's another influence again in what they call in Japanese doin. Doin is the Japanese pronunciation of the Chinese Daoyin. Daoyin means guiding and stretching. guiding the energy in the body, stretching the body. It's kind of the Japanese version of yoga. And we have the oldest exercise document in the world was found in the grave of a Chinese duchess, where she has a scroll with the it's the 48 postures of Daoyin. She thought this was important enough that it was buried with her. Goes back to over 200 BC. So they have a very long, continuous tradition of this energy-based movement work coming out of China, and that traveled to Japan as Chinese medicine traveled to Japan. At the same time, acupuncture, herbs became, you know, that knowledge was transmitted. The Daoyin did as well, and it got into the temples. And so sometimes in the temples, you'll hear sort of, I suppose, spiritual movement work called Daoyin.
Posso dire una cosa?
Possible?
Can I add something?
Oh, please, please.
About ogni, Master Ogni. Ogni dice è venuto in Italia, no? E durante la lezione andò in acqua a meditare, a fare yoga. Ogni è una pensata, no? Ma quello che sembra reale. Andò in acqua a meditare, a fare yoga sott'acqua. E il suo assistente, che si chiamava Julian, che si chiama Julian, aveva, che appunto era quello che poi l'assistente aveva portato, eccetera. Quando le persone stavano chiedendo, ma è troppo, in acqua non esce, no, sta meditando, no, sta meditando. È stato morire, no? E Lugeiro, che era il suo assistente, come devozione, come devozione a questo, si stabilì a Pesaro, c'è un centro, poi ancora oggi, dove pratica pochi yoga e anche meso shatsu, una forma di shatsu particolare, e le persone che vengono questa sera a suonare taiko, i tamburi sono in genere. Noi abbiamo delle connessioni, che ieri conoscevamo solo via internet, delle connessioni di vita e storia.
Wow. Really? Yeah. Well, so that's some of the roots of the sorts of things we do. And then quite a lot of it, I've just found my own body over the years wants to go in certain directions, and I share that with other people. So it's sort of like that, really. Yeah, that's where we kind of got it from. Oh, so what we were saying before about, you know, the Doin, the Taiso, Oki, these influences, they sort of mix together to make up really the practice of what we these days call Zen yoga. You've been sitting down for really a long time. How are we doing for time?
Qualche altra domanda?
Ma io avrei una curiosità. Dopo 20 anni di vita è tornato in Inghilterra e lei ha detto non mi sentivo più appartenente e quindi poi ha scelto di attraversare l'Inghilterra a piedi. In quel momento, quando è tornato, questo processo e poi questa scelta, mi piacerebbe sapere qualcosa di più di quel momento.
Well, so when my teacher started to talk about naming me as his successor, he, first of all, started to talk in terms of him retiring and me taking over the temple, you know, which happens quite a bit. And we thought about that, you know, talked about that and so on. But my feeling was probably I was going to be more useful in the West somewhere. And so I said this to him, and he thought about it too, and he agreed. So of course I didn't have anywhere. So when they pass on to you, they write a kind of a certificate. In the very old days, when people were homeless, they would write the certificate inside a robe, so you could wear it, you could carry it with you, you know, like that. And so he did something like that. And he wrote, part of what he wrote was Sui Getsu Dojo. So Sui means water, Getsu means moon, and then Dojo, practice place. In other words, wherever there's water, the moon will reflect on it, like everywhere temple. You have to go and find the everywhere temple, kind of like that. So when I got back from Japan, I didn't really know what to do. I didn't know how to do this walking thing. When we go begging, takahatsu, in Japan, you have a big hat on and you stand in a doorway like this and you're shouting, Konnichiwa! And you're shouting like that. That wasn't going to work in England. That was all I knew. So I just started. And the third day I was walking beside a road and a car stopped, another car. And in it was a Buddhist monk from the Theravada tradition, from the Thai tradition. And he said, oh, we've got a monastery just an hour away. Why don't you come and stay? So I walked up and stayed at their monastery. And they have a strong tradition of doing this. And they taught me how to do it. So you arrive in a village or a town, maybe 8:30 in the morning, and you stand like a statue with your bowl, like that. People just walk past, at least in England, just ignore you. And then, I don't know, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, somebody tries to put maybe, I don't know, €5 in your bowl. And you say, thank you very much, but I'm on a walking pilgrimage and I'm not touching money. And they take it away. Oh, sorry. And they disappear. And about half the time, they come back with maybe a bottle of water or an apple or a sandwich, something like this. And after about an hour and a half, you have enough food for that day. And in the south of England, people said to me, oh, you can do this here, but up north, they're really mean. Forget it, forget it. When I was walking through the north of England, they were saying, oh yeah, you're fine here, but Scotland, no way, forget it, no chance. Going through the south of Scotland, same story. But every day I met at least one kind person. So well, just about every day. So yeah, so that's sort of how it started, really. Oh, somebody gives you usually some money, and then you say, thank you, but I'm on a walking pilgrimage and I don't touch money. And they take the money back. And then sometimes they just disappear, but sometimes they come back they go and buy some water or some sandwiches or something. How long? That one, 64 days. Yeah, so maybe 30 kilometers a day, something like that. Well, thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much, Roshi. And It's an absolute honor to meet you and experience the energy of your beautiful Sangha. Thank you so much.
Dall'Inghilterra penso abbiano detto: ma cosa va a fare in Italia? C'è lo Zen, come tatuato. E qui diciamo la stessa cosa, che cosa in Inghilterra fare. Era una battuta riguardo al tatuazzo, cioè alla questua, che lui aveva fatto, che ogni volta gli dicevano: sì, qui lo puoi fare, ma se vai al nord no, e poi quando era al nord qui sì, ma così. La stessa cosa noi pensiamo, diciamo scherzando, che quando avrà detto che veniva in Italia gli avranno detto: no, qui puoi stare a fare Zen, ma se vai in Italia cosa vai a fare Zen? E comunque invece grazie di tutto di essere qui, di questa scoperta anche di connessioni, no? che ci sono, no? tra il cerchio, tra SanboJi, tra Ogni, e stasera vediamo i figli dell'assistente di Ogni, e insomma tutte queste cose. Quindi, grazie.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Questo tempo.
Thank you so much. The students in London, they want to know all about SanboJi. So would it be okay if I take some photos? Yeah. Is that all right? If they want to see what you're doing, so interested. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you.